That what a beautiful morning it is. And I always love it, not just because Mini Chavarim is part of it, as we've talked about, but because it is not about us. A morning like this really feels like it's about the community, and it's great to be davening in our fullness this morning. And the Scholar in Residence weekend is always very special. That I always try to utilize it to add to the conversations that we're having throughout the year, so that the scholars in residence, this is the first time we've done a tag team like this, really is adding to a conversation that's already taking place within the congregation. And of course, Israel is a conversation that we are already deeply engaged in, not just because last week I spoke about BDS. I'm against it. Just in case you were wondering, in case you weren't here last week. But we went into more than just that. If you think about it, how we've used different speakers that we've brought in, we have used it to complicate the conversation. So Benny Morris comes and he talks about a different perspective on 48, and it was fascinating last year when he came. Or when Jonathan Sarna came and he talks about the unique position of American Jews and Israel. When we had Shaul Magid come and talk about the theology of settlers, which was fascinating. And of course, last night, David Makovsky spoke, and so happy now to have Ambassador Dennis Ross, who will give a brief talk now and then a longer presentation after. I have lots of qualifications here on paper. I assure you, he is eminently qualified to talk about this. It has been his professional life to be involved in, he has been in the ins and outs of Middle East peace, of the trajectory of peace, of stepping forward and steps backwards. It isn't something that he has studied, it is something that he has lived. He has been in the rooms where the conversations are happening, not just an academic around it. So, but I should say a few of his official introductions, that he is the counselor and the William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and for more than 12 years, Ambassador Ross played a leading role in shaping U.S. involvement in the Middle East peace process, dealing directly with the parties as the U.S. point man on the peace process in both the George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations. He served 2 years as special assistant to President Obama and the National Security Council senior director for the Central Region, and a year as special advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. Prior to his service as Special Middle East Coordinator under President Clinton, Ambassador Ross served as Director of the State Department's Policy Planning Staff in the first Bush administration, and he played a prominent role in the U.S. policy towards the former Soviet Union, the unification of Germany and its integration into NATO, arms control negotiations, and in the 1991 Gulf War coalition. During the Reagan administration, he served as the Director of Near East and South Asia Affairs on the National Security Council staff and Deputy Director of the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment. He is a graduate of UCLA, and Ambassador Ross wrote his doctoral dissertation on Soviet decision-making, served as Executive Director of the Berkeley-Stanford program, which there alone, if you can get those two right, to get together, then that's impressive. Then the Middle East should be nothing if you get Berkeley and Stanford to work together. The Berkeley-Stanford program on Soviet international behavior. He received UCLA's highest medal and has been named UCLA Alumni of the Year. And Ambassador Ross is the author of several influential books, but this is outdated because it says your most recent book, Doomed to Succeed, that was 2015. This is your most recent book that you'll be talking about. Dennis Ross.
Shabbat Shalom. I actually see a lot of familiar faces here, and I want to say, you don't look any different. And I always speak the truth. You know, I know that everybody here wants to hear about the Israeli election. They want to hear about, how shall I put this delicately, President Trump's most recent decision on Syria. See, I didn't say his reversal on Syria. And you know what? When I do the longer talk later on, we'll get into everything you want to get into. What I want to do right now is I want to provide an overview of the book. The book is called Be Strong and of Good Courage, Hazak ve'ematz. It is an admonition. It's an admonition to Israel's leaders. And the reason it's an admonition to, you also want to hear me? The reason it's an admonition to Israel's leaders is because if Israel stays on the same path it is right now, if nothing changes, if it continues to build settlements outside the settlement blocks, it will become a single binational Arab-Jewish state. Now let me highlight that just in terms of facts, because this basically is not an argument, although I'll explain later on why the issue is not being debated in Israel. I'll get into that in the later talk. But it's not an argument, it's a fact, and I want to just highlight the facts for you. I'm going to do it by pointing out in 1986, counting the Jews and the Arabs in Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank, the ratio was 63% Jewish, 37% Arab. Now take out the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza because Israel got out. Add 1 million Russians who came from the former Soviet Union to Israel. You take out 2 million Arabs, you add 1 million Jews, and what do you think the ratio is today when it was 63-37 in 1986? Take a guess. It's 61-39, right? That's with 2 million Arabs taken out and 1 million Jews added. So the trend is unmistakable. By the way, even when it's 61-39 or 60-40, it's no longer the same kind of state it was. When Israel was established, the ratio was 80% Jewish, 20% Arab. If you have Israel and just the settlement blocks, the concept of settlement blocks, by the way, was something I helped to develop before we went to Camp David in the year 2000. The idea was we're going to have to reshape the border. We're going to have to figure out a way to deal with all the settlers. So we came up with the concept of blocks, which is the territory where the largest number of settlers happen to be located closest to the Green Line anyway. You have 130 settlements. In 5 out of 130, you have almost 45% of the total settler population. The blocks could be roughly 5% of the area closest to the Green Line. Today it's about 77% of the settlers. The point is, if it's Israel and the blocks, then the number becomes, again, about 80-20, what it's always been. So that sounds logical, right? Just do it, right? What could possibly be the issue? Well, the issue is that, you don't have a two-state outcome anytime soon. One of the things that David and I have done in this book is it's based on a core sense of realism. There is not going to be a two-state outcome anytime soon. And put the Israelis to the side. If you had Meretz running Israel today, there would not be a two-state outcome anytime soon because the Palestinians are incapable of reaching an agreement. Abu Mazen, at one point, someone I dealt with a lot, at one point he might have been prepared to make certain decisions. He is not today. He defines his legacy, what he wants his legacy to be, as not being a national betrayer, not producing a Palestinian state. Everyone around him is positioning themselves for succession, for when he's gone. Succession periods are never characterized by moderation. Everybody competes to see who can be more pure, not who can be more accommodating. So there is no two-state outcome anytime soon. But what that means is if Israel doesn't do anything, it becomes a binational state. The irony of that's actually the Palestinian default position. Let's not do a thing. They'll end up being one state. What was the PLO's credo for a long time? A binational, secular, democratic state. I'm putting Democrats in quotes because I don't think they really were. But that was their credo. So if you can't achieve a two-state outcome because the Palestinians are incapable of making any decisions anytime soon, then Israel, if it wants to retain its character as a Jewish democratic state, is going to have to make a unilateral decision. Now, given the history of unilateral withdrawal from southern Lebanon, unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, that doesn't look like a very promising history. So that's not what David and I are calling for. What we're saying is act to preserve the option by preserving the option of separation. If Israel keeps building outside the settlement blocks, where there are now more than 100,000 who live outside the settlement blocks, there will come a point where separation is no longer an option. At that point, you're a binational state. And you've lost, in a sense, Israel character. At that point, Israel either is one state with one legal system for all the people there, or it's one state with two different legal systems for all the people there. And that fundamentally changes Israel's character and Israel's identity. So what we're calling for is separation, but in the following way. Something that does not put Israel at any security risk. Israel simply stops building outside the settlement blocks. You want to build in the settlements? Build in the blocks. It declares that it will not have Israeli sovereignty to the east of the security barrier, which is on about 8% of the West Bank. It says that it will retain overarching security responsibility for the whole area to the Jordan River, but it will no longer build to the east of the barrier. It will not have sovereignty to the east of the barrier because it is preserving the option of separation and two states for later on. There are other things it can do to reinforce this. It can declare that it won't build in Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, again, to promote separation. It can give Palestinians access to 60% of the territory that is known as Area C, which today they have almost no economic access to it, which is one of the things that limits the Palestinian Authority's economic wherewithal. These are the kind of things that don't put Israel's security at risk, but it allows Israel to retain its character and it preserves the option for later on. Again, eminently logical. Who could disagree with that? Well, it turns out, that you have a very strong settler constituency in Israel. 62% of Israelis today identify with the right. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean it's a homogeneous right. You have to actually look at the right. There is the right that's the right. There is the right that's sort of okay right. There's even what I would call a center right. But they identify themselves that way, and the activism of the settler constituency that largely took over Likud through a very smart political approach makes the ability of an Israeli government to go ahead and do what we said not a simple thing. So what does it require? It requires being strong and of good courage. It requires leaders who understand what's at stake. We wrote this book to take a look at those periods when you had 4 leaders who made huge decisions that they knew when they thought about the consequences were going to be enormous, both in terms of acting or not acting, but they also knew what the costs were going to be, political and otherwise. For Ben-Gurion, he knew it was going to be measured in blood. For Begin, for Rabin, for Sharon, each makes a decision that goes against what they, in a sense, represented before. It took an act of leadership. It took an act of courage. It required them to take on their own constituencies. So we thought, all right, given what's required right now, why not see if we can draw lessons from the past and see if those could be applied to the present, that Israel's current leaders could draw on those lessons and apply them. Again, sounds logical, right? Should be sufficient, right? Not exactly. The book actually opens with me having shawarma sandwiches with Sharon. Now, I actually can eat, but I'm a minor league eater compared to Sharon. He brought in 10 shawarma sandwiches. Now, these are not your little run-of-the-mill shawarma sandwiches. These were like this. Each one was like this. And I ate 2. He ate 8. But he says, aside from eating, during the meeting, he says, I'm the last one. I'm from the founders' generation. We fought for the state. We helped to create the state. We lived during the period when the fragility of the state was unquestioned. We were in a position where the certainty of its existence was not a given. So we represent that generation that is not afraid to make big decisions. But those who follow me, they're all politicians. And they won't make big decisions. So, A, we don't know for sure whether that's true. But one of the ways to make it easier for those who, if we suggest that it might be true, one of the ways to make it easier for them is for the United States to make a series of commitments and assurances to Israel. Even these leaders, the four that we profile, even these leaders wanted to know where the U.S. was coming from. In Ben-Gurion's case, he wanted to know. That's why he sends Moshe Sharett to go see Marshall shortly before the mandate ends and the decision to declare the state or not declare it has to be made. In the case of Begin, Rabin, and Sharon, assurances from the United States. I'm not saying they made the difference. These are leaders who probably would have made these decisions anyway. But even they wanted to be in a position where the political price they paid for what they were doing would become more manageable. What it is that the U.S. commits to in each of these cases makes it politically easier for them to take these steps. So the book also looks at and lays out what is it that the United States could do to make it easier for each of these, for Israel's upcoming leaders to make what is going to be a hard choice. And I'll give you a sample of what it is, and I'll reserve the rest for later, okay? The most important thing that we can do is basically say, okay, Israel gave it the office. What do I mean by that? Israel has taken a step. If it takes the kind of steps I was describing, stops building outside the blocks, declares there'll be no Israeli sovereignty to the east of the barrier, makes it clear it won't build in Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, creates access, economic access at least for the Palestinians to Area C, and it's doing all of that because it seeks to preserve the option of separation, it seeks to preserve the option of two states. That's the umbrella. If Israel does that, then from our standpoint, Israel doesn't need to do anything else, at least until such time as Palestinians actually not only join the process, not only talk, they have to make an initiative themselves. They themselves have to show a commitment to two states in something other than a slogan, which is all we, truthfully, is all we've really seen up until now. Now, there are additional things that we could do, but the starting point is basically to put Israel in a position where the U.S. says, you don't have to take another step until we see from the Palestinians and maybe also from the Arabs that they will take explicit, tangible steps towards you and towards demonstrating a readiness to compromise. Okay, I've whetted your appetite. Stay tuned for the rest.